The women in Johnny's orbit were obsessed with him. He seemed to be like a drug. They couldn't break the addiction. He would make a point of singling one out and love bombing them nearly to make them feel $1 million, and they're just swooning at this Johnny Creswell. He loved it. You know, he was the centre of attention.
He wasn't good academically. He made up for that on horseback. He was seen as, you know, a bit of a rock star. He was almost like a magician with women. He was able to control and manipulate them as if he was playing a hand of cards. Nobody knew the secrets of his world.
So you went and gave the exclusive of the launch of our new podcast series to Brian Dowling.
I did.
On Virgin Media.
Yeah.
So now we're second prize. I suppose you might as well tell us a bit about it.
Well, so we're doing this. Did we talk about... So we ran some extracts from my book, Groomed, on the podcast recently. Everything's coming together. So we've also been, while researching that book, we've also been making a long-form podcast on our Crime World Presents series, which we've been working on for well over a year, and I'm really happy with it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It's a complex story. It's obviously centred on the death of Katie Simpson, the showjumper, and Jonathan Creswell, her killer, who almost got away with murder. And we've spoken to, on the podcast, I mean, the key characters in this story. It's really intriguing because one of the main characters in the whole story is a journalist called Tanya Fowles, who we've had on this podcast a number of times talking about this story. But she found herself, like, she's a really good reporter.
She is. And I mean, she's been filing to us for years, a kind of a
stalwart of the courts.
A stalwart of the courts.
And a really good skill to have nowadays, really reliable reporter. She works for all the national media, the BBC, etc., and for the Impartial Reporter in Fermanagh. And she's been covering courts for years. She's seen it all. She's done it all.
So people, the court reporters, they get this kind of expertise, and Tanya Fowles will be one of those. Look, there's about 10 of them across the north and down here. People that really, really know their business, and they get a kind of a legal training by default almost.
Yeah.
And Tanya Fowles wouldn't be somebody who's a sort of a limelight-seeking journalist.
Not at all.
But she definitely played a huge role in this.
A huge role, because sort of she's 2 feet in the camp as such. She's their journalist, and then she's this human being who She basically, I mean, the story of Katie Simpson starts in a small little village of Tynan in County Armagh, which is just on the border. And, you know, 10-minute, 15-minute drive, you're in Glaslough in Monaghan, where Castle Leslie is. All these places play a role in the story. But Tynan is tiny, right? And there isn't a shop in it.
Yeah.
There's a pharmacy.
Yeah.
And there's no, like, I was flabbergasted by that. I know we're not living in a metropolis in Dublin, but it is a city of 2 million people, which is small by European standards, but larger, I can tell you, than Tynan. So it's this kind of rural country area. And central to the village and some of the surrounding villages is the equestrian industry, because it's provided employment for local people. There is fabulous stud farms and country estates, former big houses, where the aristocrats would have lived, and they still have. Some of them are now working, you know, hotels in the case of Castle Leslie, estates where they need jockeys to ride out the horses. And so this whole industry builds up. And Tynan was that place. And it was Tynan where Katie Simpson was born, where she grew up, where she lived opposite where she is now buried in the little graveyard. She sort of fell in love with horses through the neighbouring Darton Ree stables, where champions were bred, where there was pony clubs, and where Jonathan Creswell came to work as a teenager.
You opened the podcast with describing a picture, a photograph, because the story of Katie Simpson, it's not just the story of her murder and her tragic death. There's this other collection of women who play a role in what ultimately be the investigation into her murder. And of course, Jonathan Creswell, who's at the centre of it all. Tell us why you picked on that moment to sort of open the series, I suppose.
Yeah, because I suppose we open and we're looking at photographs that were taken at a hunt ball. And you have all these women who are kind of used to mucking out in stables, but they're dressed up for the occasion. They're dressed in beautiful clothes. They've their hairs done and they're smiling for the camera. They're all together. They're all friends. They're all hanging out. And in the centre of them, in many of the photographs, is Jonathan Creswell. And, you know, he's smiling ear from ear. He's like the cat that got the cream, and he's with these women. And amongst the women in the photographs are Katie Simpson, who he will later rape and murder. His partner, Christina, who is Katie Simpson's older sister, with whom he had 2 children. Hayley Robb, another young show jumper, who it would emerge he was in this very coercive, controlling relationship with for years as well. And a young girl called Rose de Montmorency Wright, who would wind up in a dock of a court being, you know, pleading guilty to her role in covering up Katie's death. And all these women, and we suspect that the woman taking, or the person behind the camera on the other side of the camera, may be Jill Robinson, who's another character in this story. So it's a photograph that brings everyone together.
Yeah.
So we open the podcast with sort of describing who they are.
Yeah.
And then we will go on to delve very deeply into the relationship that Johnny Creswell has with all these women.
Because that's really the story, isn't it?
That is, yeah.
It's how he manipulated all of these women in one way or another, and how he almost got away with murder. And the real question is that to do with his personality? Is it to do this? But a large part of it also looks at, is it to do with that enclosed world that they're all living in, the equestrian world, really?
Yeah. And like we go into his background, into his childhood as much as we can, into him emerging as a man. I find it quite intriguing that as a boy of 15, 16, he has confidence. He is able to mesmerise and charm women older than him. You know, he's only 16 and he's in a relationship with Jill Robinson, who's a very, you know, successful jockey, show jumper herself at this stage. She's 8 years older than him. And he not only, you know, has the confidence to be in that relationship, but he holds the power in it, which I find amazing, because there's a big difference of 8 years at that stage.
Yeah.
You know, as you get older, that
balances out a bit.
It does, very much so. But I mean, most teenage boys are awkward.
Oh, yeah,
and full of insecurities.
Yeah, but he's obviously pushing himself forward, and that's kind of symptomatic of people that at least are able to put on that show. But who knows? There's obviously underneath that charm, underneath that kind of that ability to mesmerise, there is a darker, controlling violence. When does that start to emerge? And
like, it pretty much
is there straight away,
because Jill Robinson would say in a documentary recently that she was sort of brokenhearted by him.
Yeah.
You know, she fell in love with him, and that he started sort of doing the dirt on her, and she was really, really heartbroken. He starts, you know, to play women at that young age. By the time he comes to Tynan Village, which is where he will meet Christina Simpson, his long-term partner, and the mother of his children, and the older sister of Katie, he's very confident. He's 18, he's coming along to be a trainee jockey, and he is out on the circuit. So show jumpers basically go to events, they compete, they ride horses for, you know, big stud farm and wealthy owners, I suppose. And if they do well on a circuit, in show jumping, or in a race, in point to point, obviously the horse becomes more of a favourite. And then if it is a horse that's going on to sire, it will be a very valuable resource for its owner. But he comes to Tynan, he's on that eventing circuit, he's jockeying, he's a divisive character, actually. While he charms some women, others curl their lip at him because he's crude, He's, he makes really kind of offensive jokes sometimes. People sometimes just don't like him. He gives them the creeps. But he goes on very quickly to meet Abby Lyle. And we've heard the story of Abby Lyle. She's represented Ireland last year in dressage in the Olympics. She had a very lucky escape from Jonathan Creswell. She begins a relationship with him. She's a little bit older too, 23, and he's about 20. By the time they meet, he takes her number, he love bombs her. She thinks she's met, Prince Charming, brings him home to her house. And we'll hear in the podcast, actually, the nuances of what are going on at that point in Abby's life and with her very supportive family, because her mother is becoming unwell and the family are dealing with a lot of stuff at the time. And her sister Rachel, who is probably Abby's best friend, her older sister, will describe how Creswell first presents in the home, how he fits in so well, how he gets on with everybody, and how the family start to then suspect there's a darkness to the relationship with Abby, how she starts to retreat from the family and how they start to notice that this is a toxic relationship.
Which of course is the big sign when people are in those kind of coercive relationships with somebody, is that they try and separate them from their family and friends. And that certainly seems to be his modus operandi. When does he end up with Katie Simpson, and what are the circumstances? Because obviously, not to state the obvious, it's highly unusual for somebody to be involved romantically with two sisters. And, how does that all come to pass?
And in a way, you see, that is a narrative that's been out there. And it's why I called, first of all, the book Groomed, and secondly, our podcast series Groomed, because it's never a romantic relationship with Katie.
Yeah.
She's 10 years of age when he starts to target her and groom her. It's a violent, coercive relationship. It's not known because Katie's dead when he first perhaps sexually assaulted her. What is known is that on the night of her murder, the night before her murder, he brought her across the border and raped her. He used an MO that he had previously used with Abby Lyle during their relationship, which came to an abrupt end when he travelled over the border into Monaghan with her, told her she was on the grounds of Castle Leslie country estate, and beat her so badly he was sweating and had to take his shirt off. He strung her from a tree, he tied her up, he terrified her, he told her he was going to kill her, and she believed that. Creswell went to jail for that.
But only very briefly.
10 years before.
Yeah.
He and there was no suggestion that he had raped Abby, by the way. That wasn't one of the charges put to him at that stage. But literally 10 years later, he does similar with Katie. He's behaved in similar ways with these women along the way. He controls them through their phones. He seems to have their passcodes. He takes their phone whenever he wants. He goes through it. Any messages he deems to be inappropriate, they'll be attacked savagely for that. He also has this, he uses the car as a place to assault them, and while driving, which is really scary for them. And he sort of has this thing that he treats the horses and the women the same. And you talk to people who understand horses, and particularly Tanya Fowles, again, is somebody who is horse mad and knows a lot about them. And she describes what was once called the breaking of a horse. It's no longer called that. The equestrian industry has moved on, and people now gently get a horse to trust them so as they can first, I suppose, put themselves on their back, and later, put children on the back of a horse. So a horse becomes, allows itself be ridden. But she believes, broke the horses violently. And in many cases, people who had given them the horse would say that the spirit of the animal was broken. I mean, the animals can never talk and never tell us whatever he did, what cruelties he subjected them to. But some of the women have spoken a little bit. It took a lot, and really the full story of what he did in the background hasn't truly come out. What we do know is that he was accused of the worst crime that you can commit on another human being, which is murder. He staged Katie's death as a suicide. He told hospital and police that story, even though that's a whole other part of it, because it's quite shocking that that was believed and it wasn't investigated. It took months and months for him to be investigated. But while we start with that photograph in the podcast, I actually start at Katie's graveside in the book, to describe the location and where we're at. Because what struck me and what sort of drew me to this story in the first place was that when I heard that Creswell he'd murdered her, obviously. He'd brought her to hospital. She'd been revived on the way in. I'm not a medic, but she seemed to have her heart had stopped for a long time. And while she was revived, she was on life support. Could she have any hearing or, whatever? Yeah. We don't know. And people who've been in situations like that in hospital, you offer words of comfort to the person who's dying. You'll talk to them, you'll tell them they're okay and you're with them. He was at her bedside.
Yeah.
During that time, she survived over a period of days on life support and he was whispering in her ear.
Yeah.
And not only that, but when she was brought back to Tynan to be buried, he carried her coffin and lowered her into that grave.
Yeah.
And stood, as the earth covered her coffin and she went, to her grave with the secrets of what had happened to her. I just thought that was so poignant and so bad.
So at that moment, as she is buried, he must think he's gotten away with murder, because the police have, it appears accepted fully that she took her own life, and she's in the grave. And at that moment, maybe he's thinking, I've got away with this. But of course, he doesn't ultimately get away with it. And then we probably come back to Tanya Fowles, and she plays a significant role in getting this case looked at again.
Absolutely. I mean, she is key to it, really. I mean, she tries and tries and tries to contact the PSNI, the investigators in Derry, because she dies in the hospital in Derry. And she tries to contact them and other people too go to the police.
Because Tanya remembers the previous cases. That's what
100%.
Yes.
She knows that this guy is a domestic abuser of the worst kind. In all the years she covered the courts, she describes how she never heard such violence as Abby was subjected to that night. She knows of Creswell and his reputation around her own home place.
Yeah.
And how confident he was after serving that short sentence for the Abbey Lyle, how he had convinced people that Abbey Lyle was a nutter and that, she told lies, she was jealous of him. And he even convinced them that he pleaded guilty to all those charges against him because he just wanted to save her the embarrassment of having to go to court and tell her story. He sucked it up, basically, did his time. There was a party for him when he came out and he was straight back to work and straight back on the circuit. And that, was something that Tanya really felt was abhorrent. Yes, when Katie Simpson was presented at the hospital with this, suicide, people didn't believe for a second she was in that place. She was very much looking forward to her future. There was little nuances. People who knew her were absolutely shocked, couldn't believe it. And the fact that it was Creswell that presented her, the fact that she had been, living within his world, controlled by him for so long, was very suspicious. But there was other things that that Tanya really thought raised red flags. Firstly, the attempted strangulation of Abbey Lyle 10 years previous, the driving her over the border for this assault and attack, and the mobile phone, Katie's mobile phone, was missing after she was presented to the hospital. And all those things, Tanya felt, what? This is really similar here. This needs to be looked at. This needs to be examined properly. She was blue in the face trying to get through to Derry. At one point, she was told to ring the press office.
Yeah.
She was actually ringing as an individual, really concerned about this. There was other people too. There was a guy called Paul Lusby, who will be introduced to in the podcast, who was a sort of a relative, a sort of a distant relative of Creswell's, and who hadn't liked what he saw, the way he was treating the women when he came into contact with them. There was a nurse from the hospital who didn't like, and there was relatives of Katie who just simply didn't believe she'd taken her own life. And all of them seemed to have been stonewalled by the police investigating in Derry. Ultimately, Tanya will go to a detective she knows in Armagh. And in the north, you're allowed, this is quite weird, somebody outside of the area, if they have concerns over the investigation of a case, are allowed to sort of throw an eye over it over a period of 48 hours. And if they can then convince the PPS that there is possibly something here, it can then move something into a murder inquiry. Do we have that here?
I don't know. I've never heard of it.
I've never heard of it either, yeah.
No. But
and that's what happened. But she basically really, really knocked on all doors, and she was just so significant in it. She went above and beyond her role as a journalist and just a human being in the community. She really pushed herself out there to get this thing. She believed in it and showed, I think, her own moral code throughout.
So, I mean, that's one of the questions, is a couple of the questions that this series gives rise to is both how did the police get it so wrong, and also was it something to do with the world, the equestrian world, that allowed Creswell to operate for so long, without people, without drawing huge red flags.
I mean, there's a police ombudsman investigation and now an inquiry by the Met Police into the handling of the whole thing. And, the ombudsman has found a lot of things, and there's officers who've now retired. There's been some suspended. They have been under sort of, I suppose, minor disciplinary over it. I think the broad brushstrokes of the police ombudsman was that there wasn't this inquiring mind.
Yeah.
That it was accepted what Creswell had said. And then there was so many failings. I mean, there's a lot of failings.
Yeah.
It's certainly not coming out of it that there was, what would you say, collusion or anything like that involved. It was more, to me, looking at it.
I think what happened, sort of a thing of where people make a decision and then they get stuck into defending that decision.
Yeah. Rather
than maybe having an open mind.
Yes, and coupled with these other significant parts of it, which are, under unskilled police being sent on certain jobs, and there was a problem with Creswell. It didn't initially come up on the system that he had this previous history of domestic violence. It wasn't hidden on the system. The system is clunky. Yeah. So there was all these kind of things went against Katie Simpson, really, and went for Jonathan Creswell. But ultimately, it's re-examined. What was the other thing you asked me there about the equestrian industry? Yeah. I mean, I would have thought the equestrian industry should look at itself in this regard, because this happened in plain sight, a lot of it. I think it is one of those, and maybe all sports are similar. There's stables, there's privacy, there's cover. There's a kind of a roughhousing goes on that can probably be, but you could hide a little bit more crudity within that.
I think it's interesting how people that are involved in predatory behaviour, they do go and look for these worlds to operate in. So obviously you talked about sports coaching. I mean, that's been across the world. People who are of a predatory nature have been attracted to that job because you get people who are desperate to do well in their sports. You get people that are young, possibly slightly sheltered in that sports can be their whole world, and they haven't got much experience outside of that. Similarly, obviously, with the church in the past and in other sort of closed systems where a mentor figure can have an excessive amount of power. The problem with the equestrian world is it's not a unified world, is it? That there's not an overall, there's loads of little empires in it. But I do think that attracts predators, definitely.
But the story of Johnny Creswell is slightly different because he was a kid when he got involved in this industry. So he wasn't attracted to it. No. He wasn't a formed predator by the time he was involved in it. He sort of evolved as a predator within it. I think is more fair to say. And because he was so good at what he did and the nature of it, he had a bit of a celebrity status as this jockey. At one point, after he had been jailed for the abuse of Abbey Lyle, he was picked for a Channel 4 ad for the Cheltenham Festival, where he's depicted as being carried shoulders high by, having won a race is the ad. He's picked. He's the golden-haired boy, And what you have is an industry that attracts young girls, in particular, who love ponies. They just want to be around the horses. They want to be, there and photographed with the foals when they're born. They will go along to these yards. They'll help muck out so as they get a ride on the horses and they, get maybe go over jumps, whatever. They absolutely love horses. It's an all-engulfing world then when you get involved in it, because it's 6 a.m. to, midnight.
Yeah.
It's hard work.
Yeah.
And I think that gave Creswell the ability to control the females around him, because they were with him all the time. They didn't have a life outside it, mostly. I mean, they grabbed moments with friends, or they grabbed poor Katie before he murdered her, and really what led to the jealous rage that caused him to cross that line was she had started to see this young guy, her own age, totally appropriate, and they'd been together. And he had taken the phones. Unfortunately, the chap had been seen on the road, and the word got around, and it got back to Creswell, and he questioned Katie and took her phone and got more and more angry over the day. But it's all encompassing. It's a social life, it's a hobby, it's work.
Yeah.
You're there from morning to night. And they are all sort of living together in close quarters. It's not unusual for there to be jockey houses and all this sort of stuff. So, yeah, I don't know
Well, I think because those are small worlds, it allows the abnormal to become normal. And that's just the way those things work. And you're right, he didn't come as a fully formed predator, but it obviously allowed him to flourish in that context, And
become empowered, because he got away with things. He was crude and rude and nasty sometimes to the horses, and people saw things and they turned away because he was Johnny Creswell.
Yeah, and also
complaints were made, and it was Johnny Creswell, so
And obviously he had that conviction, I think, is another thing, and it doesn't seem to. We talk about cancel culture, but none of that happened. Which I do think is unusual, I have to say.
Is it? Because he's a celebrity? Because I think celebrities get away with a hell of a lot. Within that world I'm not talking the general public.
Yeah.
I mean, Tanya would say that she believes that, this needs a proper inquiry, like Utri.
Yeah.
How did Savile get away with it? How did Savile? Savile was, a lot longer and, a separate case as such, but he was a celebrity who got away with absolutely anything he wanted to do in plain sight.
Yeah. So is all of the episodes out now? Or where can people listen to it?
We dropped 3 last week, and we will have dropped 3 by today when people are listening to this, another 3, so that's 6. Hopefully 6, if not, we'll have certainly 2 of them out, so either 5 or 6, and then we've 9 parts in total, so we will be dropping the final episodes over the coming weeks. But it's there. Everybody should listen to it, should tune in. It's on our Crime World Presents feed,
yeah,
where we have, other series. We've Caught in the Crossfire, about the murder of Anthony Campbell. We have Double Cross, which is about the murder of Robbie Lawler. And we have our first one, of course, which was in relation to the Beast, the cold case investigation into Noel Long. So there's plenty of listing there. But, I mean, this case is out there. This isn't ended. This isn't finished. This inquiry is still ongoing. No, of course, I should have said that Creswell took his own life as the murder trial began. Denying justice, really, to Katie's family. But 3 women were left to carry the can. They were Rosda Montmorency Wright, Hayley Robb and Jill Robinson, who pleaded guilty to their roles in the cover-up of her killing. The judge made it very clear that none of them knew she had been murdered when they helped him cover it up. They believed that he had beaten her the night before, given her hiding, as what he described it as, and that he was afraid that, you know, the police might look down on him over that. Yeah. So they helped him in various ways. But the coroner's court for both Katie Simpson and for Jonathan Creswell's murder will be, you know, coming over the coming I was going to say months, but we're in the north, so, you know, it's going to be years.
Yeah.
And also those inquiries that are ongoing. I mean, the Met Police have taken to, are independently inquiring what went wrong in the murder investigation. And that, to me, is one of the biggest stories. It's one of the biggest scandals for the PSNI in recent times.
Yeah, and hopefully those hearings will provide more information, because there's still a lot to be learned, I think, from this case.
For sure. Thanks, Niall.
Thanks, Nicola.